Did the ancient Greeks really build the first computer 2,000 years ago? And how did the Chinese predict earthquakes centuries before modern science? These mind-blowing ancient technologies are way ahead of their time. You won't believe how advanced these civilizations truly were. Hit subscribe because we're diving into the secrets that history books never told you. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. The Pyramids of Egypt. The Great Pyramid at Giza is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and people have been mystified by it for many, many years. The enormous size and precision of the building are scarcely thinkable with the technology of the tools applied during its construction 4,500 years ago. The ancient Egyptians had very unpretentious tools of copper and no cranes. Moreover, the wheel had not been invented yet. So they could build probably over something like 20 years through manpower. What's even more mind-boggling about the pyramids is their precision. Even though the Egyptians knew very little about astronomy, the Great Pyramid is perfectly oriented to the cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. And really, even today, it is one of the most perfectly oriented. Adding to the mystery, this pyramid is at the center of the Earth, meaning that all lines that go north-south and east-west meet at this point. The proportions also relate to the Sun's radius and Earth's mass, further intriguing how Egyptians could be that precise. The construction of pyramids stands out as part of the greatest mysteries in history. Antira Mechanism. The Antira Mechanism is one of these truly ancient, enigmatic devices retrieved by divers way back in 1901. It took nearly a century before scientists could determine its intended purpose. The artifact consisted of bronze pieces that had lain underwater for about 2,000 years, and at first sight it looked like a pile of moldy rocks. When researchers hooked pieces together, there appeared a complex system of gears and rings. They used modern X-ray technology to realize that this, in fact, was an analog computer developed by the ancient Greeks. The Antira mechanism was built around 150 to 100 BCE to follow solar and lunar calendars and predict events such as eclipses. It even helped count down to the Olympic Games. The device was about the size of a small clock and had dials and knobs to which one moved its hands, thus allowing the user to follow planetary phases. It's just insane how accurate and high-tech this 2,000-year-old thing is, quite impressive even to this day. That shows truly how smart the ancient Greeks were. Greek fire was this super scary weapon concocted by the Byzantine Greeks back in the 7th century. It was made up of some secret chemical mix that made quenching almost impossible by throwing water on it. It clung to whatever it hit, be it walls, ships, or even people, and it kept burning like crazy. Greek fire was normally contained in glass jars and thrown toward enemies, whereas for Byzantines, this hose system existed through which the substance could be sprayed over longer distances. Probably one of the most famous uses of it came in defending Constantinople, where the Byzantine navy wrecked the Arab fleet before they could get near the city. But dude, Greek fire? The fear and chaos that it brought was totally next level back then. Yet, we still don't even know how they did it. It was about as destructive as modern napalm. It just goes to show how crazy, advanced, and lethal those early war techs were. Viking Compass. Besides, the Vikings were as physically fit as very talented in their routing through the ocean. One of those small secrets was the Viking Compass, well known as Vegvisir. This 8-rune stave symbol coolly guided them to keep on course across those epic voyages. Whereas most seamen used to navigate with the use of stars, the Vikings used this weird compass even in cloudy or foggy conditions. The Vegvisir most probably symbolized cardinal points, north, south, east, and west, and their various combinations. A nail was driven in the middle of that sign. By looking at the shadows, they could decide which direction to travel. The look of them was pretty simple, but very accurate, just like our current GPS devices. They also used bigger sunstones to help the Vikings identify the sun's position. It helped them to keep their journeys on course. All this navigation setup worked for them, enabling them to venture into and conquer new territories, making them one of the greatest seafaring civilizations ever. Trebuchet. This super ancient siege device, the Trebuchet, hails from the 6th century and was rather popular in medieval combat. It consisted of a long arm with a counterpoise at the end that could sling really massive stuff, like boulders, really far, at times up to several thousand feet. For that time, this was an engineering and mathematical marvel capable of devastating enemy fortifications. Trebuchets were the ultimate weapon for taking down castles before gunpowder showed up. They were super effective since there wasn't much you could do to defend against them. While soldiers could block swords and batter rams with shields or barricades, there was no way to stop those heavy stones from being tossed by a trebuchet. These were such large weapons that they were mostly constructed on site, but once functional, they could bring down walls of a castle from a considerable distance. The trebuchet made a complete change in medieval warfare, whereby defenders either had to find a way of fighting it or even risk dismantling it on the spot. Its power in battles would make it one of the most feared and effective siege engines of its time. The water clock, one of the very first timekeeping devices invented in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, was the water clock, dating back to circa 1500 BCE, or clepsydra. The internally marked receiving container would mark time as water flowed from one container to another at a predictable flow rate. This groovy invention enabled people to tell time when it was dark or on cloudy days when sundials were no good. The Greeks and Romans developed the water clock, elaborating gears and dials to increase precision in timekeeping, especially in regulating legal and administrative matters. They were used this way for just about 1,000 years, engaging such uses as monitoring the duration of pleas made by litigants in the courtroom, measuring out the workday, and the divisions of religious ceremonies. Although the mechanical clocks took over in the 14th century, the water clock still leaves a few lasting impressions. The way it works with steady fluid movement is actually pretty similar to how modern clocks work, and its history shows how people have always tried to figure out better ways to measure and manage time more accurately and efficiently. By the way, if you're enjoying these mind-blowing facts about ancient tech, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on more fascinating discoveries. Baghdad Battery. The Baghdad Battery is a really neat ancient device found in Iraq, dating from as far back as 150 BCE to 650 CE. Nothing like the batteries we have today for remotes or cars. It consisted of a ceramic pot, a copper tube, and an iron rod. Scientists believe that it actually may have produced a little bit of electricity. Though nobody can be sure exactly of its original purpose, several theories do exist. The most popularly posed theory is that it was used for electroplating, heating metal objects with a thin layer of another metal. Others think it may have been some kind of electrotherapy implemented. This is far more speculative. Another take on this is that it was nothing more than a storage vessel, but the metals used and the corrosion found in it kind of hint that it may have held some acidic solution to whip up an electric charge. Whatever its actual purpose, the Baghdad Battery proves that the ancients might have figured out electricity well before its officially recognized discovery. It's also one of the huge unsolved mysteries of history. The nest of bees. The nest of bees was a fearsome weapon developed around the 11th century, just after gunpowder was invented in medieval China. It had, however, nothing to do with bees. Instead, it was a long hexagonal tube filled with dozens of rocket-propelled arrows. When fired, it would explode and thus release somewhere between 30 or so arrows onto the battlefield. These spears were far from the ordinary. They usually had poisoned or flaming heads, making them far deadlier. In its basic conception, the design meant that armies could simultaneously shoot off thousands of these spears, throwing everyone into chaos and panic. More than that, shot arrows buzzing while flying cranked up the fear of those getting hit way higher. The nest of bees proves an awful device, bringing disorder and panic in medieval battles. It underlined how far gunpowder technology had been used militarily in China. Papyrus. Long before the creation of paper, the ancient Egyptians came across papyrus, this plant which in turn went all over the Nile River, and really found an eventual writing material. This dates back to about 3000 BCE when they made papyrus by cutting the plant into thin strips, stacking them up and pressing them into sheets, which then were laid out in the sun to dry. It was powerful and effortless to make that it became the sole writing material of the Egyptians, later the Greeks, and yet later the Romans, in recording. Especially in religious and literary texts, government documents, and administrative records of ancient life, papyrus was important. All communication and documentation about the activities of temples, royal courts, and merchants were made on the rolls that might aid in knowledge preservation together with laws and trade agreements. It gave a good kickoff to those early libraries and archives that made organizing the bureaucracies in huge empires easier. Later on, it was replaced with vellum and paper. Papyrus was important enough to provide a context within which the ancient civilizations evolved intellectually and culturally. It has really marked record-keeping and literature. The windmill. So windmills have played an important part in harnessing the wind over very long periods, right? Their first recorded use was in Persia between 500 and 900 CE. These old-school windmills, known as anemone windmills, were used for grinding grain and pumping water, so those animals and people had better get out of the way because they were tapping into renewable energy. It was a groundbreaking development for Persian windmills. These windmills were essentially a framework of vertical sails connected to a central axis. Thus, its further mechanism was made possible in rather arid and windy areas. This spread through the Islamic world into Europe, where these windmills were highly developed, mostly in countries such as the Netherlands and England during the Middle Ages. The best mechanical designs in Europe were in horizontal axis-powered flour mills, sawmills, and drainage systems. It was in the 17th century that windmills were really of major importance to farming and industry across Europe, with thousands operating. Seismograph terror of an earthquake is terrifying, but the ability to detect them, no. Ancient China developed it when they first made the earthquake detection device called Hufeng Didongyi about 2,000 years ago. That brilliant Chinese inventor was Zhang Heng back in 132 CE. His seismograph was actually simple, but worked superbly. 8 dragon heads faced 8 different directions. Below them were toad-like figures. Inside would be a ball. An earthquake that would occur would shift seismic waves to make the ball fall from one of the dragon mouths into the toad below it, to give the best idea of the origin of the quake. Though aesthetically quite simple compared to today's technology, the Hufeng Didongyi was very sensitive and gave early warnings about earthquakes. In truth, the invention by Zhang Heng speaks volumes about how advanced ancient Chinese science was, and to date, he has been touted as one of the greatest minds ever, similar to Leonardo da Vinci in the breadth of work. Heat rays. The famous Greek mathematician Archimedes developed around the 3rd century BCE this incredible weapon, which would later be described as a heat ray. His invention used polished bronze mirrors that reflected and concentrated sunlight onto enemy ships to set them on fire. Simple as it may sound, the focused heat could ignite a wooden ship and therefore would rank among the most powerful weapons in a naval battle. So yeah, the whole concept of Archimedes' heat ray has fascinated people for centuries and has even stumped the Mythbusters team, who just couldn't quite nail it. Even though it's a bit from way back in the day, using focused energy within warfare is still a thing today. Similar technology is still being researched by military researchers. In fact, in 2001, DARPA produced a microwave weapon capable of heating a target's skin to unbearable temperatures. That Archimedes' idea should have a far-reaching impact is undeniably true. We will probably never see actual lasers a la science fiction, but ideas from Archimedes' heat ray show us just how inspiration travels between ancient technologies and modern developments. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing insights.